Holler at the Historic Grandin Theatre is a live storytelling series that's the brainchild of Roanoker Lee Hunsaker. The theme for this episode is the body. Tellers share tales of lost limbs, negative attitudes about our own bodies, and how to overcome medical and psychological adversity. Blue Ridge PBS Echo is pleased to share these moving stories. Please note that the opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect those of Blue Ridge PBS or the Echo channel, and be advised that some of the stories contain graphic language and stories about mental and physical abuse, so viewer discretion is advised.
Oh my goodness. All right, here we go. We have 3 more gorgeous things. Gorgeous things. All right. We have another first-time storyteller. So I thought that the cast, and I say cast, like I thought we had all of our storytellers lined up, and then I got a note from this fellow, and there was no way that I was going to say no. I'm just going to leave it at that. He's 36. He's an economist, but currently on disability. His hobbies are pool and writing op-ed essays that flow like philosophical poetry. And it's true. He's a beautiful writer, a beautiful storyteller with a super brave first-time story leaning in for Matt Keasler.
Hooters and Hollerers. Growing up, I was a pretty normal kid. I went to public school. I played and loved sports. And when told I could be anything I wanted to be when I grew up, promptly replied, then I want to be a Ninja Turtle. There were 2, let's call them oddities, about my body as a kid. The first was how skinny I am. Today I am 6 feet tall, yet I've never weighed more than 125 pounds. The second is I have what's called pectus carinatum. Now, for those of you whose Latin may be a bit rusty, that means protruding sternum bone. Now, that pulls my shoulders forward, making it look like I have a hunched back. While both of these things are certainly merited their fair share of childhood bullying, they're both also minor, surface level aesthetic. They didn't affect my development. That was true until 20 years ago at the high school that stands 1 mile from this very building. The thumb on my dominant hand stopped being able to pinch things. It stopped being opposable. When that didn't go away, my mom took me to UVA, where they did some genetic testing, and it was discovered that I have a rare, aggressive form of a neuromuscular condition called Charcot-Marie-Tooth, or CMT. CMT affects the periphery nerves, which control the extremities, so think hands, arms, legs, feet. Think of the body like a giant meat robot. The periphery nerves are the wires that carry the electric signal from your brain to whatever part it's trying to move. CMT patients have old iPhone chargers for periphery nerves. See, you already know. So what happens over time is that nerve, the exterior casing of it, starts to fray and decay, exposing the conductor. And as that happens, the signal that your brain is trying to send to whatever it's moving gets weaker and weaker. And once the nerve is too damaged, the signal can't get there at all, and that corresponding muscle atrophies and dies. Now, unlike iPhone users, CMT people cannot order replacement nerve cells in bulk on Amazon. So there are currently no treatments or medications that can cure or slow down the progression of the disease. Now, I don't have much memory of that UVA appointment. I know he told me that CMT patients usually lead normal lifespans and that it wouldn't affect my brain, which I'm a bit fond of in a pseudo-narcissistic kind of way. But I must have blacked out somewhere along the line of he may not walk by the time he's 30. What I do remember is being conscious enough, once we were back in the parking lot, to leverage the emotionally traumatic moment we just endured to get my mom to buy me Taco Bell on the way home. Now that moment stands out to me because it was the beginning of a decade-long denial. Nothing they had told me made any sense. How would I not be able to walk in 10 years when I just ran a 9-minute mile in gym last week? I'm fine. My thumb just stubbornly doesn't want to work. No big deal. That was the story that I was consciously telling myself. Subconsciously, I was terrified. Not so much terrified of the what-ifs regarding my body, again, denial, but terrified of the opportunities that seemed like they were closing. Suddenly, I'd never had the safety net of doing something like joining the military to create educational or career opportunities. I'd never work a labor-intensive blue-collar job. I'd never play sports as an adult. I'd never, this is the hard one, I'd never be a Ninja Turtle. But I was most terrified of how people would perceive me. Now, I already personified this scrawny, niche nerd archetype in a culture that often associates manliness with capableness. So I became haunted with paranoia of what desirable romantic partner is going to want to be with a man who is disabled like this. And that toxic mentality would define me for several years. I prioritized relationships and active experiences above everything else, including school and career. I allowed a local orthopedic surgeon who expressed a fraudulent familiarity with my disease to talk me into having a reconstructive surgery on my hand to fix my thumb, which proved to be a disastrous decision because it didn't fix anything it was supposed to and exaggerated the atrophy so much that it required a second surgery 2 years later just for me to be able to open my hand again. Today, what was once my dominant hand is now a largely useless decoration that can't hold a glass or perform a handshake or even comfortably hold this microphone. Now, the silver lining to that is that during the rehab for my second surgery, I discovered I have a great passion and natural aptitude for the game of pool. It's like the universe gave me an outlet for my love of sports and married it to a tight-knit community that I needed much more than I realized. Pool would take me all over the country and give me tons of relationships and ridiculous stories that I'll cherish for the rest of my life. When I went back to school to get my degree in my late 20s, I even tied for 13th in the country in the National Nine-Ball Championship. Thank you. Now, I would love to be able to tell you that a decade of having a community and going back and getting a bachelor's degree, falling in and out of love a couple of times, and lots of therapy led to the kind of healthy acceptance of my disease that brought me here to speak to you today. Unfortunately, that's not the case. The cause of this particular metamorphosis was the progression of the disease itself. When I was 31, I felt a kink in my lower left lumbar that made my entire left leg go numb, like it had fallen asleep. I couldn't lift my foot from the ankle. No amount of heat or stretching seemed to restore feeling or function. So I went to the hospital the next day with fears of blood clots and slipped discs at the forefront of my brain. I paid for an emergency room visit and an MRI, only for everything to show that I was seemingly healthy. It wasn't until the on-call neurologist happened to glance at my chart and passively say, you have CMT, that caused the realization to hit me like a ton of bricks. Suddenly, I was awash in all the feelings of that initial diagnosis appointment. I felt so stupid that my denial was so deeply ingrained that I hadn't even considered CMT as the possible cause for what was going on, when it was so obviously the most likely cause. And if this was CMT, that was it. I would never be able to lift my foot from the ankle again. That realization, and the realization of how that would change my life going forward, caused me to break down and start crying in that hospital parking lot. And for the first time in 15 years, really internalize and accept what having this disease would mean. Now, Taco Bell didn't have the same novelty as it did when I was a teenager. So when I was done crying this time, naturally I splurged on Arby's. It has been 5 years since I broke down in that parking lot. Today, I have to wear a fancy space-age carbon fiber brace for my foot drop. My right side hasn't been plagued by the same big instant loss as my left. It's been more of a steady, slow decay. But I anticipate in the next 5 years that I will likely need the same kind of brace for my right foot, and that in the next 10 or so, I'll likely lose the ability to reach out and grasp things with my right hand as well. About a year into my current relationship, after watching me compulsively stretch my fingers and not even be able to lay down without having a heavy weighted blanket at the foot of my bed to push my foot up against, my current partner asked me, "Are you just always in pain?" Now, I thought about it for a second. I didn't want to scare her off. So I said, "I'm always uncomfortable. But the truth is, in a way, I am always in pain. It's just a bit more nuanced than that." CMT pain is hard to explain because normal people never experience anything like severe muscle atrophy or death. If a normal person experiences muscle atrophy, it's usually because they had some kind of surgery where they couldn't use that appendage or whatever for a couple months, and then they're just going to experience some extra soreness as they build it back up. With CMT, there is no building back up. Once that bridge is broken, there's no repairing it, and that muscle is going to wither and die. And that creates a sort of dull, hollow throb. If you've ever been claustrophobic, just imagine being trapped in a space that's a little too tight. After a while, all you can think about is how badly you want to stretch. How great it would feel to stretch. But you can't. And that's not all, because as that muscle is dying, the surrounding muscle groups all try to pick up its slack. So then you get the kind of hot, cramping, aching associated with overexertion wrapped around that dull, hollow throb. It's truly an exquisite form of torture, and that says nothing of the mental stress of going through all that in progressive fashion, so it gets worse the older you get. I like to say that CMT takes the human experience of a midlife crisis, of the realization that we're all trapped in these decaying bodies, and then compounds and exaggerates it into a potent distillation of hopelessness and impotence. Speaking of mental health, I'm not just here to vent to an empathetic audience. I'm here to pass on some of the wisdom that I've gleaned through the trials that have been my physical existence. And that is that none of our choices or circumstances or experiences exist in a vacuum. We live in a universe built on a foundation of chaos. Tons of things are going to happen to each and every one of us that are completely unknowable and completely unavoidable, just like my CMT. But it's also a universe defined by laws like gravity that compel a cosmic balance to all things. So, I may have been bullied for being the skinniest kid growing up, but that also meant that I've never had to exercise any kind of restraint in regards to what foods I eat, and that my friend Kim is always sending me home yummy treats to trying to fatten me up. My chest may look alien and weird, but it also gives me an expanded diaphragm that allows me to have greater respiratory endurance. And my girlfriend has discovered, to her sheer delight, that its form factor is ribbed for her pleasure and can function like a Sibian. Now, for those of you who don't know what a Sibian is, feel free to ask one of your kinky, cackling neighbors after the show. With CMT, the list of negatives that it's given me are extensive, but even it has given me many positives. It's taught me not to worry about eventualities. The things you worry about rarely happen, and even when they do, they rarely happen in circumstances that you thought about or prepared for. It's taught me to identify and avoid the toxic fake it till you make it mentality. It's taught me the value of raw, open, vulnerable communication, because when you're disabled like this, there are always going to be things that you need to ask for help with. As I examine the man I am today, it's clear to me that CMT has shaped nearly every facet of my personality. And it turns out it's this very personality that allowed me to shed the incel fears that haunted me when I was younger and attract the greatest love of my life, who is in the audience and stands as the inspiration for why I'm standing here today, because she's been dying to see me do stand-up for several years. I love you, Megan. My closing advice is this. The next time you feel like you're drowning in a sea of negativity, try to zoom out from focusing on your personal tree and examine the forest around you. Look for the positives. They will be there. The old idiom is wrong. What doesn't kill us does not make us stronger, or doesn't necessarily make us stronger. Growth doesn't mean healing all the pain and scars and trauma. It just means accepting that those things happened and allowing that acceptance to change the shape of our individual trajectories to try to lead the best life possible going forward. I truly believe that the meaning of life is to live it and enjoy it. And it's so much more enjoyable when you're swimming with the prevailing tide than when you're trying to swim against it, just because that's a direction a past version of yourself thought it was supposed to be going. You guys have been great. Thank you so much.